So 70. $160. Okay. Okay. Hey. $540. Okay. ¿Qué dice? No le entiendo a esa madre. What the hell? ¿Cómo la pesco? No sale. Fix known bugs. Oh, crasheó. Okay, bueno. Cancel update then.
Having trouble getting your truck and trailers to get connected, make sure that your focus is on the truck and then hit L, and hopefully that'll get everything going. Got any questions, problems, suggestions, horror stories? Feel free to leave those down in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.
Oops.
Your tooltip to explain.
¿Por qué no me deja?
So you want to learn how to hook up trailers like a real truck driver. None of this cheating, none of this world editor. Do it like the real world. All right? So first we need to talk about some vocabulary. This is a 28-foot trailer here, and it has a pintle hook on it by default. This is a 53-footer, and it doesn't. But we can get it in vehicle config, because you can double these. You can do as many as you want. And they do double 53-footers in real life. So when you go on rear frame, right your pintle hitch, and put that on. So there you go. And for this, the longer trailers, the dolly you want to use is the double axle dolly. You can't use this one on the short trailers because the mud flap will be too far back relative to where the kingpin connects. So it's going to hit your landing gear right here. And that's true for the truck as well. You need a single axle truck for these 28-footers. You'll see these all over the country. They run triples in a couple of states, so I'm going to hook a triple today. Here's the dolly that we're using, a single axle. And you'll notice that the truck also has a pintle hook, so that's how we're going to be moving it. That's how you move it in real life. They're very heavy. You can imagine how much weight these wheels are, and then this solid steel frame. These are very heavy. Very hard to maneuver. So being skilled in getting the pintle hook exactly where you need it is a skill you learn quick, because you're punished every time you don't succeed in that. Let's fire it up and get to work.
Hey there, how's it going? David in ARC here, and this is a very quick tip for folks having
Welcome back, Elias.
universe, not subject to all the... Thank you, Hassan. Thanks to the Royal Institution for having me back. It's a real pleasure. It's an honor to be back in this august theater. Thank you all for choosing to come here. At least I hope no one had to be externally coerced to come, but maybe you were internally compelled to come. That's the question that we're after tonight. The problem of free will, which is an age-old question. Are we really in control of our actions? Do we actually make decisions? Really, is it really us who makes the decision? Are we in the driver's seat, or are we being taken for a ride? And this question has exercised theologians and philosophers and scientists for millennia. And it's interesting to think how different cultures have thought about it. Of course, in many ancient cultures, the idea was that actually we weren't in charge of anything. The fates, the gods, somehow directed our actions. We were just their playthings, really. In Christian religion, of course, this came up as a problem, the problem of evil, which St. Augustine solved. So the problem is, how could a good, all-knowing, all-powerful God allow evil to happen in the world? And St. Augustine's solution in the 300 whatever AD was that God had given us free will, and then whatever happened was up to us, was our fault. So, of course, the Calvinists didn't like that idea, so they sort of went back on that. So it's not really clear what Christianity says about free will at large. But what is important is that it's the foundation for moral responsibility. So when we're thinking about what other people have done or what we've done, the question of whether it's right to think of praising them or blaming them or rewarding or punishing them hangs on the question of, were they in control? Did they actually make a choice? Is it something that they can be held responsible for, both in a moral sense and in a legal sense? So this question then of how can we be in charge if everything we do is predestined by the fates or by an omnipotent God, morphed, as we learned more scientifically, into this scientific worry if material causes just fully determine what happens. How can we really be in control? And of course, Isaac Newton revealed a lawful world. His equations of motion allowed him to predict the orbits of the planets with amazing accuracy. And the implication was that everything really is like that. Everything in the world is like that. And it's all explained by material forces and causes and physical stuff that's moving around. So René Descartes, a French philosopher, had considered this question. If everything is just physical stuff, then how can what we're thinking have any kind of power over that stuff? How can a thought push stuff around? So he had the idea that there were two kinds of stuff in the world. There was physical stuff and mental stuff, these two realms of substance and existence, but in some way they could contact each other. Now, he was pretty vague about how, and in fact one of his correspondents, Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, wrote to him and challenged him on this point. Okay, you've got mental stuff and physical stuff, but how do they interact with each other? He didn't have a good explanation for that, for how the mental stuff could actually intervene on the physical stuff. So we were left with a kind of a magic of an immaterial soul or a spirit that's doing things, but it seems hard to reconcile that view with a more scientific worldview. So that's the question I want to address tonight. Can we have free will without magic, but also at the same time without reducing ourselves to robots? Can we understand the mechanisms we use to make decisions without having to say it's the mechanisms that are making the decision, not us? That's what I'm after. And in modern times, there's a lot of challenges to the idea that we could be in charge as selves, as holistic entities and persons, as opposed to just material objects. And some of those come from my own field of behavioral genetics. And this is a book that I wrote a few years ago where it was laying out the very real evidence, I think, that we're not born as blank slates, that our genetics does give us some predispositions that manifest as our personality traits, which, of course, are really just patterns of behavior through time. So if we're wired a certain way, and we didn't choose that, then doesn't that mean we have at least less free will than we might have thought of? Maybe no free will whatsoever? And some people would say this sentence on the bottom here, that the configuration of our brain, which is the result of not just our genetics and our development, but all of our experiences up until any moment right now, our brain is configured a certain way, and that fully determines what we're going to do, where without us being really involved in that process anymore, we're just playing out our programming at every moment that we encounter. Now, that's not what I said, importantly. What I want to say is that, yes, of course, our genetics influences our personality and makes partly what makes us who we are as selves through time, but it doesn't close off any possibility for us to be actively involved in making a decision in real time, right now, in the moment. Now, there's another kind of a level where you can say, okay, you've got personality traits, you've got your psychology, your predispositions, and so on, but really all of that is just neural machinery. It's just a configuration of your brain, and if we go down to that level, well, we can see it's all just neurons firing. That's where the business is. That's where all the causal work is really happening. And this is a quote from Francis Crick, who was, you will know probably from Crick and Watson, who discovered the structure of DNA. He went on to become a very eminent neuroscientist. He was really interested in consciousness. But he had this view that really what you are is just this collection of nerve cells firing and all of the nerve processes going on and so on, where you kind of evaporate from that picture. It's just a very reductive kind of a view. It's all just neural circuits firing. And a lot of modern neurosciences tends to be reinforcing that view, because we can do these amazing experiments. We can look inside people's brains as they're making decisions, and we can see, oh, well, you know, you made that decision because this part of your brain was active, or that part. Or we can go into animals and we can activate the parts of the brain ourselves and make them make a decision. We can change not just what they do, but how they think about what they should do. So it seems like we're laying bare all this mechanism, and when we do that, there's nothing left. There's no person, there's no agent, there's no self left there. It's just machinery. And so one of the concerns then is that rather than neuroscience explaining how the brain gives rise to the mind, it's actually explaining away the mind. It's saying that all these things on the right there that we call psychology, mental states and goals and beliefs, the things that we would articulate as reasons for our doing things, actually just boil down to these neural activity patterns and brain states and circuit computations. They're nothing more than that. Now, if we're going down in levels from minds to brains, well, why stop? There's not really a principled place to stop until you hit rock bottom. And rock bottom here is just physics. I mean, after all those neurons are made of molecules and atoms. They have to obey the laws of physics. Just because they're in your brain doesn't mean they get a pass on all of the, you know, Newton's equations or quantum mechanics or whatever else it is. So some people would argue, like physicist Sean Carroll, for example, that those lowest levels of what we take to be reality, in this case of quantum fields and subatomic particles and so on, are causally comprehensive. And what he means by that is that the equations and principles that we know about in quantum mechanics fully explain what happens, and they don't allow or admit any other causes to be involved whatsoever. Now, I'll tell you, I think that's a mistake, but the argument is all the real causal work is just happening down at the lowest level. So not only can we reduce psychological states and cognition to just neural workings, we can reduce those to just atoms obeying deterministic laws. And the implication of that is pretty clear, as summed up here by Stephen Hawking. Because our decisions issue from the mechanics and dynamics of our brains, which themselves must issue from the dynamics of whatever quantum interactions and so on, then they must be as determined as the orbits of the planets. And it's not often I would stand in a public theater like this and say that Stephen Hawking was wrong, but he was. Wrong about that. So we have these kind of three levels of challenges, and I think it's important to distinguish them, this sort of psychological level, the neuroscience level, and then the base physics level. And I want to try and figure out how we can address those, because this is a problem not just for human free will, it's a problem for biology. It's a problem for explaining how any organism could be said to be doing anything, right? Can be acting in the world, can be an agent, can be a locus of causal power, a new kind of thing in the universe, not just not subject to all the causes of everything else, but a cause by itself in the world. And that is a fundamental property of living things. And if we want to understand it, then these dictums here are a good guide to how to do that. At least I think so. That for any biological thing, if we take an evolutionary approach to it, we may understand it better by understanding how it came to be that way. And that's the approach that I've taken in the book, and it's the approach I want to lay out tonight. So the idea is that we can delay somewhat tackling these metaphysical questions by actually, rather than saying, well, how could this work in principle, let's look in practice. How did it actually work? How did evolution make these organisms that seem to be able to act and decide what to do in the world? So for me, that's a really important question. It's not just a kind of an academic exercise of do we have free will or not, the kind of thing you talk about in the pub over a few pints, right? It's very, very fundamental to many aspects, including clinically important ones, like what does it mean to be a self? What are disorders of selfhood? Things like schizophrenia and dementia and so on, where the self somehow dissolves or dissociates. How does that relate to disorders of control, where like OCD or drug addiction or things like that? We need to have a science of these kinds of conditions that allows us to see the mechanisms without the person disappearing, without the self disappearing. And I think that we can. I think that we can do that. It's also very interesting and relevant these days in thinking about artificial intelligence and artificial life and artificial agency. Maybe to make an artificial general intelligence, you might have to make an intelligence, an agent that can interact in the world. I'm not saying that we should. Just saying that that might be what's required to get us to that point. More fundamentally, I think just in terms of biology, the way that we think about living things, agency is absolutely crucial to what living things are. And it's not often talked about. If you look in any biology textbook at the characteristics of life, you'll see things like respiration and metabolism and maybe movement and homeostasis. You won't see agency. The fact that living things can act in the world is so fundamental, but it doesn't feature that much in our science of biology. I'm going to tell you some reasons why that is. So really where I want to start is actually what does it mean to be a living thing at all? Because that distinguishing characteristic of agency is what distinguishes them from non-living stuff. So Erwin Schrödinger in 1943 gave a series of lectures in Trinity College, Dublin, where I work, called What is Life? And he was a famous physicist, and he took a physicist's view on living things. And in particular, what he was interested in